Welcome to Season 2 of the Revenue Marketing Report powered by Caliber Mind. Our goal on the RMR is to help marketers move from subject matter experts to strategic business partners. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and I would like to introduce Mark Ostrander.
Yeah.
Mark?
Hi, Camela. Really nice to meet you. Thanks for having us here. Excited to be here.
Thanks for coming on board, and I'm excited to hear more about you and talk about our topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to jump right into it.
I would love just a really quick 20,000-foot view of your background and...
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I joined the market in 2008, right as the financial crisis was coming in, and joined Forrester as an event sales rep, kind of SDR role, calling on event marketers, trying to get them to go to Orlando and Chicago to all these events that they had budget cut for. So just jumped right into kind of that prospecting SDR and really was able to work on my voice as I was hitting a lot of voicemails back then, as there were a lot of people that were in a tough spot.
Yeah. And I remember that time well because I was working for a B2B company that was selling to auto dealerships.
Yeah, it was tough. We went from having full and overcapacity events sort of overnight to dwindling. So obviously things turned around quickly there, progressed through kind of sales development phases before taking on an enterprise new business role there, and then came to Integrate about 9 years ago and have been with Integrate since. So started on the new business team here, brought on some wonderful customers, and about halfway through moved over to the customer expansion or account management team here. So very fortunate to be working with some of the top B2B marketers in the space.
Wonderful, and very relevant to our topic. And it's something that's a pet peeve of mine, and I think it's yours too. It's why campaign goals are important.
Yeah.
And we like to say here that it's really important to nail the basics, and I think this is one that often gets skipped way too often. Have you seen that in the market as well?
Yeah, we have. It depends on the organization and sometimes the size of the organization and who's being, who's driving the strategy, I'll say. Oftentimes we'll sometimes speak with marketers who have a budget in place, who are looking to run a potential program. And as soon as we start uncovering the goals of the program, you can see that, we might have the persona and the audience that we're looking to go after, but, we don't know the measurement of what's going to be, judged a success or a failure. And so sometimes, we'll see teams with really small budgets, with just incredible audience sizes that they're trying to go make an impact on. And sometimes you have to take a step back and say, would it be potentially better to take that smaller budget and put it towards a smaller list? Because, sometimes, 2,500, 3,500 accounts is a really big audience that it's going to be hard to move the needle on. So just trying to identify that unit of measurement that's going to dictate to success for the marketer. First, try to be super wide, super broad, and hope that something happens once it comes into the funnel.
And that speaks to me on a very personal level because I've had a really hard time getting sales teams to buy into that more targeted mindset. Yeah. I totally 100% believe in it as a marketer. I think it's the best, most efficient way to use your spend. But a lot of sales teams still have that volume mentality where they think of, we need to start with this huge pull to get at-bats, and then from at-bats, da-da-da-da-da. I know we didn't really talk about this ahead of time, so it's kind of a curveball, but how do you suggest approaching that conversation with a sales team that kind of has that mindset?
Yeah, I think it depends on who you're speaking to. If you talked to me while I was at Forrester and a sales rep, I would have preferred 100 leads a day because I needed to make 100 phone calls and get all that outreach and those touches. So that was probably something that I would be working towards. And if you're a marketer serving an SDR team, sometimes it is, a measure of that conversation with the head of that team, whether they report into sales or marketing, is quantity better than quality? Because at this point in my career, I'd rather have one decent qualified lead a week than 100 leads a day, just from the idea that, the intent is there, that maybe there's been engagement through some of the nurturing or reaching out through some of the newsletters that the marketing teams put together through LinkedIn. So getting just one qualified lead a week, I would rather take that than have to sift through, a lot of top of funnel, low touch leads. So that really gets into, Camela, what the conversation is of what happens when that data comes into the system, right? Is it immediately being passed to the SDR, or is there some type of digital engagement that's taking place?
100%. And I think part of it too, when you're dealing with an SDR team, can speak to misalignment on KPIs. So when you're giving somebody a sheer volume metric, like those 100 calls per day, you're kind of setting yourself up for that battle between volume and targeting. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would agree with it. And it really speaks to what's happened with marketing ops and sales ops teams. There's the term revenue marketing that everyone is sort of talking about, but there's also rev ops teams. So you had the marketing team, right, in 2008, 2010 that started buying Eloqua and Marketo and different like Pardot, and started nurturing and saying, oh, there's this beautiful cadences. Serious Decisions came out with this methodology of the waterfall and getting leads in the top, right?
Yes.
Of course. So what's really kind of evolved since then is, and I think that the pandemic was really a catalyst here, but the emergence of sales teams having their own technologies, like a sales loft
Yes.
or an outreach, and they're saying, hey, Camela, thanks so much on the marketing side. Appreciate what you guys are doing, but I'm going to take over here and have our new sales cadence. And they were sort of competing in a way, right? This arms race of either the sales tech and the marketing tech. And so you see that convergence now with the RevOps team to say, hey guys, we're going to have only one cadence out, because a lot of conflicting messages going to the buyer from the marketing team and then the sales team. So it really comes down to, I think having the same goals and same alignment on how we're going to reach out and try to engage with that contact or that lead, if you will, as they come into the internal tech.
Yeah, so many thoughts just popped into my head. So first one is, part of what's driving that are the privacy laws, and marketing teams really being cobbled by some restrictions there. Now, I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, because I think we abused what we had, but there are some loopholes that the sales team can use that marketers can't. So would you say, where I've seen some success is partnering the marketing team with the sales team, reviewing cadences and acknowledging that, let's say the marketer has 15 years of experience with email and understands that sales emails have to be structured differently in order to make an impact. Let's combine powers and make sure that those outreach methods are being maximized.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I sometimes look at the lead as it comes in as the baton, and sometimes working with partners, you're at an event or LinkedIn and the contact comes over, and who's responsible for that, right? You try to put too many hands on it. So maybe it goes to the marketing team first to score, to qualify, to put some arbitrary numbers on it, to say this is a persona of ours, it's a company that potentially is a fit, and now we're going to pass it over to sales, versus marketing holding on to it, sales seeing it, and then you have that divide, right? So I think just articulating and putting down to paper what the path is going to be for an individual, either at a new business account or at a customer account that you're trying to expand maybe into a new area. Because knowing myself and the sales peers that I work with, sometimes you see the names come in, you get very excited, you want to jump right in there and rip it from the marketers queue and nurture steps. So sometimes I think there's definitely warrants kind of bypassing some of those processes, but other times you need to really trust the process, trust the system, understand that maybe they're not a qualified lead at this point, just learning to get a little bit more information and kind of just sit back.
Yeah, and some of that is just patience on everybody's. Some people have to learn through failure, and that's just how it is sometimes. So let's take a bit of a step back. We were talking about common missteps we see when executing a campaign. And what's interesting is I think we've already touched on all of those points. But to summarize, where you see a lot of companies making missteps, what are the top 3 factors you see over and over again?
So I really go back to starting with the goal, starting with the end in mind. What's the goal of the campaign? What's the goal of the program? Is it a single channel campaign? Is it something that you're just running in social? Is it obviously an event or a paid type of syndication type program? And just trying to define how we're going to be measuring it. Kind of goes back to the budget that you have, the audience that you're trying to serve to, and where the leads are going to be going. If it's going to be going into a nurture queue, if it's going to be going to SDRs, depending on where the leads are going to be initially scored and measured by, that really dictates, I think, the strategy that a team or a marketing team would want to put in place. As mentioned, we work with a lot of different teams, and it kind of maybe speaks to the second piece is siloed. We'll work with a team that comes with the list, or they have an audience that they want to start working with and engaging with. And there's so much work that's already being done by their peers, either in the digital side of the house or in the event side of the house with virtual events and things like that. And there's a lot of data that exists in terms of engagement of the account. So we talk to a lot of teams, and there might be 1,000 accounts, and there's no way to segment that list in like a tiered ABC. With where accounts already interested in, whether it's an intent-based solution that you're implementing, that you have, that you're able to find that data on. Is there activity off of your website or engagement from other programs to maybe say, let's start with these, or let's definitely avoid these 200 accounts for certain reasons, because you wouldn't want to include those in your campaign moving forward if a peer of yours has already uncovered that they're either out of market or not a good fit. So trying to maybe kind of ask that conversation before you get going, because a lot of the teams that we work with run campaigns on a quarterly or even sometimes a 6-month basis, because there's so much work to set up and to launch and get going, which is totally fine. I think that run rate, but the idea of setting it and forgetting it versus coming in and kind of find out, do a quick test, see where you're making an impact, see where you're not, and then pivoting. That's really one of the biggest pieces that we'll talk to on teams, is trying to put kind of those checks and balances in place to say, all right, let's stop, 6 weeks into the quarter, see how things are going, maybe check on the persona, make sure, you guys have the right account list, maybe there's new content that's come into play, things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think as marketers, we have so much data available to us that it's completely overwhelming. However, if you're waiting until the end of the quarter to do a retrospective, you're not doing it right. I think there's no excuse for specialists in certain areas to not know which metrics they should be watching as a campaign goes out the door, to make sure, they could see that something's not performing well. Let's say we're talking about email. Open rate is abysmal. Immediately we understand, we need to adjust the subject line. You don't want to wait until the end of the campaign to figure out that one of your first channels that you're reaching out with isn't working. So I guess I just got on my soapbox a little bit there.
No, but you're speaking back to identifying the metric of measurement and monitoring it and checking in on it on a frequent basis, whether that's, every 2 weeks, or you have to pick the cadence that works right, because, it's not a B2C environment where you'll have so much data and trends, on a 24-hour clip that you're able to go day to day. Maybe if your organization has a shorter sales cycle, you could see something like that. But for a lot of teams here, you want to identify what that cadence is to come in and check on the data. But the idea that you're putting all this work in and effort, and it's just going to run successfully for 6 months. When it does, everyone looks like a hero. But the last thing you ever want to do is get to the point where you're halfway through, exhausted either budget or efforts or a database, and say, oh my gosh, we need to make a crucial pivot. So identifying what that unit of measurement is, and then following that really quickly, I think allows teams to then put a pause in place and adjust.
Yeah. And I think what I'm trying to hammer home is that you can't just choose one metric for the entire campaign. As you've got different channels and different components, you need different measures. And I would advocate for checking at least weekly, because there's this concept of diminishing returns, particularly in advertising. And sometimes you need to rotate out the copy. Sometimes you need to rotate out the visuals. Sometimes you need to change messaging altogether because it's no longer relevant. These are things you have to stay on top of as it's happening.
Yeah, you're so right about that, Camela. And one of the pieces in terms of the measurement component is those early indicators, right? Because ultimately we want, as marketers, they want to have an impact on pipeline. They want to have an impact on revenue. And it's what are the signals that could potentially lead to that? We work with a lot of different teams that look to say, hey, this campaign, we're 60 days in, we haven't seen any impact. It's a pipeline until you understand more about the buying process, where certain companies are, how long it takes, shifts, where people will buy services or a product potentially 2-3 years at a time, and understanding when the wins come in, they come in big. So, right, like waiting for that pipeline 60 days in, it isn't potentially the right signal, where someone with that smaller life sales cycle, might have that impact already. So, go back to like that old MQL or AQL or SQL that you have, but it's that engagement potentially with that contact. Once you start engaging it, kind of once the lead comes into your system and once you're emailing it, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a great signal. Let's now see that as a win, and let's go back and look at the measurements there. But it's this balance, I guess, because sometimes marketers get stuck generating all these MQLs waiting for the impact on revenue. And sometimes, it's going to come until it doesn't, right? So it's a balance of, to your point, having different indicators within each stage and monitoring those along the process.
Yeah, and that's where advanced analytics come in really handy too, is to make sure that the content is it's registering with the right audience. So let's say I'm selling to B2B marketers and I have a bunch of construction contractors going to my website. That's a problem.
It is. It is.
So, but I love that point, because revenue and pipeline in B2B can take a really long time. And setting that as the ultimate goal for the campaign and not looking at other indicators, like you mentioned, exactly spot on, you're going to be waiting a long time to see whether or not it's working.
Yeah, and I think everyone's moved to this ABM model too, right? So the AQL and the MQL has really changed in terms of being able to go out and get names. A lot of the teams that we work with, you try to get a balance of coverage to accounts, whether they're running display to them or whether they're running paid efforts or LinkedIn, right? So I think the measurements that we used has really kind of changed, and it's now more of like an account qualified lead, as you're trying to build out the buying committee of an organization, where either you don't have a product in and it's a new business play, and going back to like, that's a totally different strategy, tactic, generating awareness. They don't know who you are, for someone who already maybe has one of your products and you're trying to upsell or cross-sell to another area. So, because you have the account, it may be a totally different buying team or persona internally. So being able to decipher, which ICP for each of those components, and then having those early stage indicators, it gets more complex, but you can kind of see how the workflow is for whether you're targeting that new business list or a list of customers where you're trying to land and expand.
Totally agree. So when it comes to ABM, so let's back up a little bit and talk about how we get to that target list. So I'm
a sales rep. I send over the list of the accounts that I want, and the marketers go get leads. Is that how this all started?
That's funny. So I'm having flashbacks, and the reason why I'm laughing is I went to a sales leader and I said, hey, I need to know, like, for each territory, what are the 10 accounts they want to win this year? Let's just start there. That doesn't work, because then I get back, well, why don't we start with these 3,000? Every time. So how do you recommend thinking through ABM targets?
That's a really big question.
I know. I'm sorry.
It kind of goes back to the new business and then expansion piece, because I know that there are a lot of marketers that are tasked supporting a team that's trying to be a new logo specific. And then there's teams where there's the upsell, cross-sell. So that's, I'd say a little bit different, but let's take the new business piece in general. So if you're starting with sales leaders, it goes back to aim small, miss small. So rather than ask them which 10 accounts and you get that 10,000, what's your budget going to be for that? Were you really trying to make an impact? With so many accounts, I think maybe taking one or two from each rep and trying to move the needle and show either whether that's awareness and familiarity, driving people back to your site, whether it's through LinkedIn ads or LinkedIn lead gen forms or virtual events and things of that nature. Right? There are a lot of different paid ways to go out and get those people to kind of come through. But at the end of the day, you have to tier out that list of accounts. And what are you doing to tier it out? Is it by fit? Is there a system or a platform that you market with? Do you have content that aligns really well to a particular industry within those set of accounts that works well? Because your best piece of content is something that you're going to be leading with. So maybe you look to that, to what speaks to it. Is it a case study with a certain set of customers, right? Like low-hanging fruit here is some of the things that we'll try to advise on teams, because it can be really daunting when you have a really big list. And even if you have a decent budget, it's going to be spread so thin. You need to know how you're going to be measured by success. Aim really small. And then, as we just talked about, be ready to make a pivot and make an adjustment. Or when you see success, you can dial it up a little bit.
And I feel so fortunate because we have a really complex but fruitful tech stack where we're integrating intent signals. We've got a web tracker. We've got all of these pieces that can really help us identify. I think you want to find your ICP. You need to do research into who you've won with recently, because that can change with the specific product that you're marketing. And then look at all of these signals to identify who's already kind of nibbling at the hook, because you're going to have such an easier time for people who already accept that they have a problem that they're trying to solve. And then it just makes communication so much easier.
Camela, you're speaking a lot to the timing component. And that's really hard for a new business team to understand if they're not already in dialogue with the organization to where they are, because most of the solutions are going to be serving a team that's making some types of transformation or some types of shift, right? You're trying to win that budget. So until you know where that team is at, it's really tough. That's when it's much more advantageous to be working with a team that's trying to upsell or cross-sell to an existing customer. You maybe know, are they an early mover in terms of moving to technology and are going to be really quick? Are they laggards? They have old technologies, old methodologies that they're using, right? And so how to then combine content and timing to kind of bring them along that evaluation point. But yeah, much easier when you kind of have the pulse or the personality or culture of a team and how they buy, to be able to know how things are going to move, to strategize and prioritize certain accounts. Because I'll say to teams, there are certain teams that we try to sell to and work to, and they've had success for a long time certain ways, and they're not going to move. And then you have other marketers that I would imagine are the type of person who are buying the new iPhone or the new, right, as soon as it comes out. They're early movers, they're jumping on the next piece of technology. So you have to be ready for those. So you kind of serve and target and market those customers in an expansion style differently, because they have a different way of buying. So once you're able to kind of identify that, you're able to then use that to your advantage as you're marketing and pushing content and your brand to them.
Mark, I'm nodding so much my head's going to start rattling. Spot on. I love it. So those of you who are selling to B2B tech companies, G2, huge. They have intent signals that you can integrate with Salesforce as an installed package. When people are searching for your product family, that's a great sign that they have some sort of initiative or incentive to possibly make a change. That's going to be a much easier target than just doing a built with query to see if they have a certain technology and cold prospecting.
Yep. And that goes back, Camela, too, to the, would I rather have one lead from G2 on someone who's, the search queue there and how, it's organic, it's such heavy, high intent in terms of a signal. Versus, I was at the B2BMX show this week, first getting the list of people that came by. We didn't have too much swag, but, leads from events sometimes are very engaged based on the conversation or not at all. So being able to kind of pick and choose what those are. But yeah, definitely agree with G2. It's a little scary being on the vendor side to kind of start like peeking behind the curtain and see how some of the reviews there. So Integrate's done really well with G2, which has been nice, but there's no holds bars there. So people are very honest. And so it's great to see, when you're reviewed favorably, that things are hopefully going to go quite well once a brand pops up there.
Yes, we feel very fortunate as well, because every time you see that new review come in, you're like, oh, yay.
Yeah. I don't know why we're all like so conditioned to think worst case scenario, but yeah, it's definitely a valuable channel, I think, in terms of what we've seen here. And if someone's not leveraging G2, it's definitely something I recommend checking out.
We're using an engagement intent signal to define our narrow targets with this ABM approach. How do I sell this internally? How do I get buy-in from the sales team that this is the right approach, or do I proceed and ask for forgiveness later? What have you seen work?
Yeah, I think the idea is, when you start with that list, you went to sales asking for 10 accounts, you got 1,000. There's going to be some level of frustration that more accounts aren't going to be a part of the campaign strategy, right?
Yep.
But there's a lot of data that speaks to what percent of companies are currently in market, and that just makes sense, right? Just like anyone's gone out and bought a car or bought a TV, you don't see those commercials until you're in market for them, and then you can't stop. So I think just understanding that the goal of leveraging intent and leveraging signals from G2 and other review sites like that is trying to identify and really reduce a number of accounts that are on the list, with the idea that some are going to come in, some are going to come out, but the quality, and this is, to each his own, right? Like, you could sit with this strategy, but if it's not working, you can always pivot. That's the whole idea, I think, here, is pivoting early and not committing too long. But the idea being, like, we're going to see how this works with the intent leads, how that comes in. There's a lot of data behind it, and really, I don't want to say that it should convince the sales team, but those high engagement of the domain on particular topics, we've seen really big success with that. We use it on a lot of the campaigns and programs, and we have a lot of customers that bring in their own intent, whether it be from Bombora or another organization, and they start with that list of, say, hey, we have 20,000 accounts. I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do here? And they go, but we only have 400 right now that are currently, the ones that we're going to put within the campaign. So that's a great example of being able to take what is that ICP audience and, like, how do we get to a smaller spot where we can see something that actually moves the needle.
I love that, and it segues perfectly into the next point, which is, we talked about this a bit, but what should we be measuring? But beyond that, like, I feel that if we can flag those accounts and watch them as marketers and look for successes, we can celebrate those successes early. And then that kind of proselytizes the whole program if you truly are having success.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I do. I think this is probably the most complicated component of it, is defining that measurement and where we should be. Again, it goes back to what's the goal of the campaign and the program. And if you're, I hate to use the term, but some reporting to sales and being judged by sales, it's going to be, what opportunity have you got? I mean, close one deal, or like it's like, what's the super ready lead? So if that's the success, it's just a really, really tough role as a marketer, because you have these accounts that a lot of conflicting pieces between the timing piece and competitors and market, the performance of the product or solution in general. So it just really goes down to saying, like, as a marketer, you can generate 1,000 leads that are all from intent signaled accounts, and then what, right? If you go through LinkedIn or you go through on-demand webinars or paid syndication, you can get those leads in. They're all going to AQL because they meet the ICP and the target account list. It's like, well, then what? Right? So it's that more down funnel, like, how do we get them to move them along? And that's really, I think, where it gets difficult, because depending on the cadence that you have and that relationship with sales, if everyone's kind of reaching after it and overwhelming it, I think, it's going to be a really tough go. But I think the teams that have a cohesive strategy with sales, to whether it's through that nurture engagement that you potentially have set up, or, hey, we're going to pass this one straight to you based on title, role, and company, at least the sales rep will be like, this is great. This is the lead that I was looking for, or the person that I was looking for, that are part of the buying committee. So I think you can have a win in that point, and just getting those discussions and trying to have that, that's a success. Understanding that not every lead that's going to come in is going to equate to a close one deal, but it's those at bats that you're trying to set up, those discussions that you're trying to set up. So getting them over to sales is usually what's most important, but we don't want to just pat ourselves on the back sometimes for getting all these leads in from the accounts. It's then also getting them through that process over to them for that discussion.
Yeah, and I would counter that with, I totally agree. We don't want to be celebrating the wrong thing and being completely out of alignment with sales expectations when we celebrate something. But I think we're also not used to flexing that muscle when we should celebrate it and socialize it. So we have a great first meeting, the opportunity is progressing. That might be a good time to tell people that it looks like this is working.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's a great time to celebrate that. And looking back at the different relationships I've had here at Integrate with our marketing team and even previously, I think, just being on the same page, we keep going back to that, being able to celebrate that early is just terrific, because I think sometimes there's this like over the fence mentality, and you don't get the feedback and you're not able to celebrate it. And so I think sharing that success is really important.
Oh, and that brings me to one of my other pet peeves, which is saying we deliver all these great leads, but sales never follows up on them. That is such a missed opportunity for talking to the sales team and seeing why those leads aren't working out. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, it is. I think depending on how you have reporting stood up internally, it can be, what kind of lead was it, right? What channel did it come from? What account was it in? And is it a prioritized account? I think as this SDR, I remember seeing where leads originated from, whether it was the web form and the cross your fingers for the contact us web lead. But then there's also the event, the webinar, the newsletter, LinkedIn, paid syndication, right? There's all these different avenues, and like you're prioritizing your follow-up as an SDR or in sales, and it's like, you're looking for those high intent type leads. And so a lot of the times it goes back to the quality over the quantity, and maybe potentially they're getting too many if they're not following up with them. I think there's an argument for that, right?
Oh, yeah. And I've seen a ton of success looking at how each channel converts and then peeling back the ones that they're kind of scanning out anyway. Like content syndication is great. I'm not saying don't do it. But if your conversion rate's at around 1% and your sales team's ignoring them anyway, get them into a nurture program.
Yeah, that's probably my biggest pet peeve. Here at Integrate, we automate a lot of channels, connecting leads with our internal demand acceleration platform before they get into different marketing automation systems. And so that's really kind of the context to the discussion we have of where the lead's going, because there are different channels that, again, should potentially bypass some of the marketing engagement, and maybe even go straight into that sales outreach, whether it's a direct email or the sales cadence. So there's high intense leads where you say, hey, you guys take this. And then there are other ones, to your point, syndication or low intent potential leads that you're going to send over to them and kind of confuse the queue of the SDR. And those touches aren't ready. They're definitely more low intent compared to like a G2 or LinkedIn or something off the website. So having them percolate through a nurture, get to certain scores, thresholds, and engagement, and then go up, that's where we see a lot of success within that particular channel here. But definitely have conversations with marketers all the time that are going to take the leads, one touch and send them straight over to the sales, and know that that's a tough one.
I think that really speaks to how they're being measured too. The marketing team specifically. So if they have an MQL goal, that might encourage the wrong behaviors. I think it's also really important to read the room. So if you're at a really small company that's just starting up, you don't have a lot of leads, and the sales team is like, just give me whatever comes in and I will chase it down. Maybe it's not the right time to gate stuff. So read the room.
Yeah, definitely on the gated piece. I see that as a big reason, and we work with a lot of campaigns that are on companies' websites, right? And you talk about having data that's gated and not, and then you go out to the partner world, and a lot of ways for them to get credit is to gate it, to go through that process of, right, we're holding your email hostage, right? We've got the content, or we've got the brief, or the case study, or the analyst report, and we need your email, we need your consent and opt-in. So there's a lot of abandonment there too. So on your website, totally ungated, let everyone take it, but understand that the partners, kind of have that process in trying to confirm consent and engagement there. They have to do it that way. But
yes, a whole other episode. We could talk about that one forever. Mark, thank you so much for coming. This has been a great conversation. Where can people find you online to network?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn and over here at Integrate. So in the office today to take this, but typically just working out of the home office, as most of us have been. So I'm based in Boston, and we've got a great community here in our office, but probably going to just be hanging out on LinkedIn and hopefully at a couple more events as they pop up here in the Boston area. Again, was at B2BMX this past week. Saw a lot of folks, but excited to touch base with people as this world slowly opens up.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for those of you listening to the podcast, if you enjoyed it, tell a couple of friends, subscribe, rate. It really does make a difference. And for those of you looking for more content like this, check out calibermind.com.